My name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Horror Homestead. This is a video in an ongoing series I'm making where I talk about all the Fazbear Frights anthology novels in the Five Nights at Freddy's series. In this video, we're going to talk about the 8th Stitchwraith stinger at the end of the physical novel Gumdrop Angel. I'm currently a believer in the Frights fiction fan theory, which states that all these novels are actually in-universe novels published by Fazbear Entertainment. Now that we're talking about the finale of this book, I can say this. This is not just the best Stitchwraith stinger. If this was a standalone story, it would be one of the best in the series. This is an S-tier story. Let's get into it. We open with Detective Larson, who last we saw had been stabbed by Afton, and then that wound was cauterized by Jake inside of the Stitchwraith. He's in the hospital. A nurse tells him that he had serious surgery and has an infection. In line with the hard-boiled detective trope that we've been putting Larson into this entire time, Larson once again comments on how attractive this nurse is. As Larson recovers in the hospital, he deduces that the Stitchwraith is not evil, because it resisted Afton pulling in agony-infused objects, and also because it healed his wound. The Stitchwraith is a good guy. He's let out of the hospital, he's still on pain meds for a while, he gets to see his son. We skip over those scenes, because even though they're Larson's entire reason for doing everything, I guess we the audience don't need to be endeared to Ryan, we'll just be told Larson loves his son. That's like literally my one criticism with this entire story. Larson begins to hallucinate. I'm just gonna read out some quotes. The web light chiaroscuro that held Larson's attention was blurry, and Larson was trying to bring it into focus. As always, when he had one of the episodes he was having right then, he felt dizzy, and everything around him devolved into a nearly transparent haze. Through that haze, Larson was seeing things he shouldn't have been able to see. He was getting glimpses into the past. These glimpses weren't like daydreams, like the mental pictures that he could summon up when he let his mind wander. These glimpses were real. Or at least they seemed real. They were memories, but not his own. These images belonged to others, from different places and different times. This is such a great follow-up to what we found, where we just learned that basically agony can recreate your worst memories and make you hallucinate. What Larson is experiencing right now is exactly what Hudson just did. Except these aren't Larson's memories, they're other people's memories. That was the strange thing about these visions he was having. He wasn't just seeing things from the past, he was experiencing them. In addition to the vibrations that fluttered through his body, Larson could smell fresh pizza. As Larson watched the animatronics perform on a stage that looked like it was filling his bedroom, the scene shifted. This was another thing that was freaky. Not only was he dropping into these lifelike vignettes, but they also changed constantly. One minute he was in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The next he was at the movie theater. The next minute he was hanging out with his friends, or at least someone else's friends. But always, no matter how many times he jumped from one scene to the next, the filler, that's how he'd come to think of it, between the stories was always the same. As his mind swept from one visit to the past to another, he always saw the same thing in between. He saw a ball pit. This goes so hard. The ball pit that we haven't seen since Into the Pit. The first thing we read about in the series, Into the Pit. The first agony-contaminated object in the series is the driving force behind most of the other events in the series. We haven't heard about Oz or the ball pit in 8 books. And suddenly the first thing we read about becomes the driving force in the entire story. This is genuinely epic. If I didn't know this was coming, this would have blown my mind. As we'll see, time has passed since Into the Pit, so Larson, finding the pit after all this time, is like us rediscovering it after the many months of waiting for these books to come out and reading through them. We've read many stories on many hundreds of pages. It's been so long since we've seen the ball pit that when we see it again through Larson's perspective, it really does feel like a lot of time has passed. It's like revisiting an old friend. But before we do that, we cut to Jake. Jake, still in the Stitchwraith obviously, sees a homeless man sleeping. He accidentally trips and falls on him. He's worried at first that he killed him because every other time the Stitchwraith has touched a person, they've died, but this man is fine. This is likely because it was Afton who was actually choosing to kill the people that they touched. It's not just an intrinsic aspect of the Stitchwraith. When Jake touches the man, he gets an insight into his memories. He sees the man around a dinner table with his family. It's a very happy memory. But then he digs a little deeper. He gets more flashes of the man's life. He then sees a horrible car crash that kills the man's entire family. Jake is experiencing the same sort of memory hallucinations that Larson is in this same story. Larson is likely going through this because Willie Afton stabbed him, but this seems to be an ability that Jake just has. Jake decides he wants to help the man, who is asleep, and he gives him dreams about that happy family dinner. I don't know if that's necessarily the correct thing to do, because those might be some bittersweet dreams, but Jake still thinks he's in the right. We then hear footsteps coming down the alleyway. Jake turns and runs and hides in a side building, where he sees a teenage girl passed out asleep. She is very thin and looks awful. Jake touches her and gets flashes of drug use. She's an addict. Then men, who were just following him down the alleyway, burst into the room. Jake realizes that they're her drug dealers. They say that they're just there for money. They try to get past Jake, it's dark, they don't realize that he's a giant robot, but he gets mad and he starts to fight them. The second man, whose face was covered with old scars, stomped over and kicked Jake. Jake didn't react, but the movement and the sound woke up the girl. She opened her eyes, they were a deep blue, and immediately she hugged herself, curling up tighter as if she could wrap her body in a cocoon of safety. She was clearly afraid of the scar-faced man. When the girl's gaze flitted to the second man and she tried to scoot backward, Jake could see that she knew both of them. Jake shifted his attention back to the men. Jake was pretty sure they were dealers. The two men started approaching. Jake decided he needed to make them go away. He stood up. The men sidestepped Jake as if he were nothing. As Jake turned, Scarface strode to the girl and kicked her leg. "Where's my money, you piece of trash?" "Hey!" Jake shouted. "Leave her alone!" Both men laughed, and Scarface pulled out a knife. Before he could do anything with it, though, Jake took a quick step forward. He didn't think, he just acted. His anger and outrage were driving him. Jake grabbed the scowling man and lifted him easily. Dangling the man in front of him, Jake shook him hard. The man immediately went from sarcastic jerk to sniveling kid. He started crying. "Please, please," the man begged. "I didn't mean—" Jake didn't bother to listen to whatever the man was going to say. He was too angry to hear clearly anyway. It felt like an ocean was roaring in his head. He could feel heat pulsing through his endoskeleton. Jake gave the man another violent shake. Then he tossed him through the window. Glass shattered and sprayed. Rain spattered in through the hole the man's body had made. Jake turned toward the other man. The man with the scar held up his hands and cowered away from Jake. "Hey, it's just business!" He was whining like a kid, too. Jake didn't care. He stepped forward and backhanded the man across the jaw. The man went flying into a stack of boxes. He rolled onto the ground, and Jake dropped down on top of him. Jake's rage burned even hotter, and when he pointed a finger at the man's face, his finger was glowing red hot. Jake studied the man's cruel eyes. Easily holding the struggling man down, Jake thought for a few seconds. He bent over and held the tip of his middle finger against the man's forehead. The story then cuts to the perspective of a nurse at a hospital treating the two criminals, and she notes that the burn on the man's head spells out, "Just say no." At first I thought that Jake touching his head might be a Mark of Cain reference, and it still might be, but I guess it's more of just like a haha, he's a drug dealer, and it says just say no. Cut back to Larson. He's following his visions, and he winds up outside of Jeff's Pizza. He describes an old man who gives him the key to the building, and he describes how run down it is. This shows how much time has passed. I hope the old man is Jeff. We don't know, but I hope Jeff is, like, still there, chillin'. The room was thick with dust. Whole civilizations of dust bunnies wafted when Larson moved. If you remember back to when we discussed Into the Pit, dust was synonymous with the death of the town, and Oz cleaned out that dust, but it seems like dust has taken over Jeff's Pizza. The evil has returned. Larson steps into the pit and he investigates the balls. He sees that they're covered with old blood. He takes a couple samples because remember, he's a policeman. We then cut back to Jake for the end of the story. Him and the girl are hiding near the train tracks that we keep seeing throughout the series, probably around where the pit trap chaser got smushed. It's also very likely that the homeless man that he helped was Grim, the homeless man that we keep seeing throughout the epilogues. Outside the shed, something scraped across the wood siding. After the scrape, a metallic rattle cascaded down the door, then seemed to scrabble up the wall next to it. Then something thumped on the roof and clicked down the other side of the shed. Jake traced the movement carefully. Something was out there. Something was crawling out there, he was sure of it. Jake pulled his metal legs close to his body and edged nearer to the girl. He knew he was currently occupying a big endoskeleton, but right this second, he didn't feel like that. He felt like the kid he really was. Something was outside the shed, scrabbling around as if trying to find a way in. Jake cocked his head, listening. He put an arm protectively over the girl. just in case whatever was out there broke through the roof. But he also trembled. He wished someone was there to put an arm over him, too. Analysis. That was incredible. If I was reading these when they came out, I would be so hyped. Larson's finally, back on board with the plot. We're actually moving it forward. He knows the Stitchwraith is a good guy now. He's tying everything back up to the ball pit. Jake is embracing his role as a protector, as the Stitchwraith, the character he's been all along, unless you count the real Jake, in which he was just a little boy who was dying of cancer. There's something outside of the shed, probably Eleanor, trying to get in. The story ties Larson and Jake's stories together by cementing that their stories are actually around other people's memories, which also ties them into Hudson's story because we just learned how this worked and now we're actually seeing it as part of the plot. We know that Hudson's story cannot take place in games continuity. We are currently treating it as if the entire Fright series is not in games continuity, which means it's very likely that what we found, Hudson's stories, and the Stitchwraith singer are in continuity with one another. It's very possible that in the Stitchwraith universe, FNAF 3 didn't happen, but Hudson happened. Meaning we can take these rules and apply them over here. We could have always done that, but it's much more of a strong connection. We learned some rules in what we found, and now they're important to the Stitchwraith stinger, and it ties back to In the Pit. This is incredible. Into the Pit, not In the Pit. Is there really a big difference? I don't know. If the story was just called In the Pit, would that be worse? That might make me think of Tartarus, Greek mythology, which is actually something that's Into the Pit. That's a thing. As always, we're now going to talk about the entire book, the antagonist, the protagonist, the morals, the themes, etc. So Angel, Sergio, and Hudson are all young adults whose life situations suck. They all have father issues, and they're all just trying to cope with what life has given them. They all also meet a potential partner in their stories, but it doesn't work out. In the beginning of the story, Angel and Sergio both have hope for their near future, but Hudson does not, which makes him different than the other characters. He feels like he has nothing. He doesn't even have hope, which is why I think that his despair is greater than the others. Another interesting thing is that they all suffer from body horror. Angel becomes a gummy person, Sergio cuts off his face, and Hudson burns to death. They also all die. These stories all fit into a very similar mood, which makes the book cohesive. This is probably one of the more cohesive stories, especially given that the Stitchwraith ties right into what we found, and it kind of sucks that all the stories are relatively mid. It also makes the book kind of boring because all the stories are so similar. The antagonists throughout these stories don't have much cohesion. The antagonist of Gumdrop Angel is either Dominic, if he meant for this to happen to Angel, or just Fazbear in general for creating the evil gummy yummy that for whatever reason turns you into candy. I still don't get it. The antagonist of Sergio's Lucky Day is Lucky Boy, I guess, and the antagonist of what we found is Springtrap and Agony, just Fazbear in general. You could say that Gumdrop Angel and what we found, the antagonist is just Fazbear in general, but that's not true of Sergio's Lucky Day. If there is something that unites these three stories, it's that people with traumatic pasts or character flaws can easily fall victim to dark forces. I think that's the theme of the book. The same negativities will infect everyone, but it's people with difficult pasts that are the most affected. And it sucks that these three nice people all die in such horrible ways through basically no fault of their own. But I think the moral is something to the effect of, circumstances affect all of us in different ways, and it's not weak to be affected. What all three of these characters lack are people to help them with what they're going through. So they face these struggles on their own, and they all fail. Not because they are weak, but because reality is harsh. The moral of the story isn't they deserved what they got. The moral of the story is, if you find yourself in their shoes, you need help from other people. And if you know someone who's in their shoes, you should offer them help so that they don't, or you, or they, the person struggling, don't end up like these three characters. I compared Sergio's Lucky Day to addictions like alcoholism and what we found to depression, and I think that those are very important comparisons. Alcohol affects everybody differently. There's some people who can drink just fine, and other people have their entire lives destroyed. That's not weakness. Alcohol is just evil, and some people need additional strength to overcome it. Having depression is not a weakness. People just need strength and support to overcome it. I can't really think how to apply that to Angel. I don't know. I think that Jake's story, including the line, "But he also trembled. He wished someone was there to put an arm over him, too," fits all three stories very well. You need other people. Sergio's Lucky Day and what we found also add to the list of stories where dark forces are found in trash. Lucky Boy is literally found in trash, and Hudson says that some of the items from Fazbear Frights were from a landfill. This is a very interesting recurring motif. Ranking time! I didn't really like any of these books. Gumdrop Angel was probably the best overall, even if the ending was confusing and I don't understand what happened. Sergio's Lucky Day was written very well, and I loved where the story was going, but the ending dropped the ball so hard that it kind of soured the entire thing. And what we found is a great concept, but one of the worst executions of a good concept in the entire franchise. They all are going in B and C tier. Current tier list. S. The Real Jake, The Breaking Wheel, The New Kid, Count the Ways. A. Fetch, Coming Home, In the Flesh, 1:35 a.m., Blackbird. B. Out of Stock, Into the Pit, Gumdrop Angel, The Man in Room 1280. C. Sergio's Lucky Day, Bunny Call, Dance With Me, Step Closer, What We Found to Be Beautiful. D. Room for One More. F. The Cliffs, Hide and Seek, Lonely Freddy, He Told Me Everything. And that's the book. Good riddance to the worst cover in the entire series. That was supposed to go further. Catch you on the flip side. Haha. I think that's what Michael says in The Office, right? In the funny basketball scene.
See you on the flippity flip.
Most of my audience are actually in their early 20s. I don't have a lot of kids who watch my channel. You guys still watch The Office, right? That's a thing. That's a popular thing, right? Anyway, I didn't really like these stories, but the Stitchwraith is one of the best by far. I have very high hopes for the next book, and for the first time, I am going to be very, very, very invested in what happens in the next Stitchwraith stinger. I almost want to, skip ahead and read the ending, but I'm not going to do that. We're going to cover the next 3 stories first, starting with Puppet Carver. And remember that Freddys stands for Friendly, Respectful Engagement, Discussion, and Discourse Yields Success. I would like to thank my June patrons. Brandon, Lauren V, Morgan, Nan, Scott, Sophie, Suka, and Wooly, as well as Billy, Chamikon, Klaus, Eliza, Halmar, Johnny the Night Guard, Kira, Lauren R, Rhiannon, Rose, Sebhar, Thamagata, World's Greatest Bard, Yaboy Peachy, and Zannyface, as well as Emily, Gremlin, HHD, Jinx, Jose, Kenneth, Mustard Shirt Guy, Rolo, and Riley, as well as Ellie, Jojo, Jeannie, Mariuna, and Ray. I would also like to thank my Night Guards. Those who made it to Night 1, Violet Puppy, Haley, Sophie, Poppy, Bob, Theory Chum, Riley, JT Kelly 18, Golden Productions, Louie, and Jackie. As well as those who made it to Night 2, Miss Trap and Ya Boy Peachy, as well as those who made it to Night 3, Just Because and The Moving Marker, and those who made it to Night 4. A Bored Person, Omni Soap, Bowie, Hannah K, Jazz, Darilight, DP Musique, Zoratunic Lucas, Zeta, Nuka, TC, Tom, Vanessa, Jungle Boy, Bonafide, Rattler, JJ Abrams, Lisa, Daniel, Hopine, Pastel Ghost, Leanne, Broken Spoon, B-Dub CEO, June, Kiyomi, Gremlin, One's Up, Amaranth, Glorp, Absolix Guardian, Asker, Minecraft Enjoyer, Pickle Pepper 900, Fritz, Henry Entertainment, Asteroid Panda, Arcadeus, Shrapnel Stars, Klondike 12, Thramak, Jam, Brian, Amateur Short, and Ice Mint.